Right now, what we are seeing, what is the story right now for Pakistan? A lot of people say it's a story of despondency. हर कोई छोड़ना चाहता है. Everyone wants to leave Pakistan or whatever. I have not seen a more fragmented, a more divided and inequitous education system as fragmented, divided as it is in Pakistan. To help and eventually to even individualize learning and to go into edtech as well, right? Because edtech right now has tremendous potential. And so they asked him, what do you do here? And his reply was, we are trying to send a man to the moon here.
Hello and welcome to InferTalks, a podcast where we put you in the room with some of the biggest thought leaders from around the world. While you're with us on InferTalks, don't forget to check our micro-explainers on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. And now on InferTalks, joining me today is Dr. Faisal Bari, Associate Professor of Economics at LUMS and Senior Research Fellow at Ideas. Dr. Faisal Bari, welcome to InferTalks.
Thank you.
All right, so let's start our conversation. And the very first question that I want to ask you is about leadership crisis that we see in almost any and every avenue that we see in the country. Let me then ask you, what exactly is leadership to you?
Leadership is, first of all, to me, an ethical and a moral question. It's also a question of choice as well. Do you want to be the leader? Are you willing to take on that responsibility, burden, whatever you want to call it? That's a choice that you have to make. That's the first thing. And then the question is, do you have the right frames for thinking about leadership? Right? So a lot of my thinking about leadership is coming from, say, somebody like Bolman and Deal, who have a four sort of frame for looking at leadership. One of them is, when you work through an organization or think about leadership, think structurally. Think about roles, responsibilities, the organogram, the structure, who has to do what. Second, think about human resources. What do people need to do what they have to do? How do you support them? How do you create the environment for them? How do you create the networks for them? How do you enable, empower, etc.? The third is the politics of the situation. You have to be very aware of what are the coalitions that you want to build, what are the ways in which you want to create a momentum for what you want to do, what is the opposition thinking, opposition to your ideas, not necessarily political opposition, and so on. And how do you engage with them? And the fourth frame is symbolic, which is, what is it at the larger level that you're trying to achieve? What's the story you're telling about what you want to do? And everyone has a story. Many stories sometimes, but they have a story. So
and why are stories necessary?
Stories are the way we live. Stories are the way we make sense of the world. So how do you make sense of some of the most momentous occasions in human history? You tell stories about them. There are aspects of it that might be true. There are aspects of it that might not be exactly true, but that's the story that you build around them. There's an entire mythology that gets built around them, and that's how you convey meaning of what you do. So there's a very interesting anecdote that I read somewhere, when US had decided to create NASA and reach the moon within 10 years, somebody was visiting, a high dignitary was visiting NASA, and there was somebody who was there cleaning the floor. And so they asked him, what do you do here? And his reply was, we are trying to send a man to the moon here. Right? He didn't say, I'm just cleaning. That's the mission and the story that has been built to everyone within their organization. And that's how you get a very, very strong mission-driven endeavor. When you say there's a crisis of leadership, this crisis is across all of these four frames, right? Our institutions are not working. They have been undermined. They don't have the strength that we need in institutions, right? So it doesn't matter whichever institution you think of, whether these are universities or whether these are the Supreme Court or XY or whatever. Our human resource does not have the ability to do the work that they need to do. We haven't empowered people. We haven't given them and it's as true of teachers in our education system as it is of administrators, etc. The politics of, obviously we know, is all jumbled up, scrambled. There's too much competition, not enough cooperation, and so on and so forth. But it's the stories that have become completely jumbled up. Right now, what we are seeing, what is the story right now for Pakistan? A lot of people say it's a story of despondency. हर कोई छोड़ना चाहता है. Everyone wants to leave Pakistan or whatever. That's the story we are getting, and it gets reinforced every time. Sadly, that's probably what a lot of people feel also. But that wasn't the story some time back. That shouldn't be the story if you really want to be. So it is up to the leaders to start changing that story and say, where is the hope? What are we working towards? What is it that we want to go for? And it's not going to come from an IMF or somebody like that, and it's not going to be their story also, right? IMF will tell you about a stable economy probably, but that's not the story that we want to sell. We want to sell the story of where Pakistan wants to be, where we want our people, the youth bulge, the this, the that we have, how are they going to shape the destiny of Pakistan, and of course in some ways the world as well, because we're a very big population.
So taking this conversation forward on storytelling, we have all types of leaders trying to tell different stories. You have one set of leaders, they end up harboring a lot of ulterior and bad motives. They tell certain stories and try to rally people behind those causes. And then you have a different type of people who try to bring people together and move them in a certain direction to achieve more altruistic and all kind of better goals. How then do you distinct between bad storytelling by bad leaders, if I may, dumb it down to that level, versus good leaders?
There are two things that have to happen. One is the institutions need to have the strength to stay even when there might be bad leaders for some time, right? So even when, so if you have strong institutions, even a Trump can probably do certain amount of damage, but not a huge amount. Some of the US institutions survived. But if you have a Trump every 4 years for quite some time, then the institutions are also going to go, right? And so it comes down to the wisdom of people. Will the people buy the stories that leaders are trying to tell them? If they are willing to go for the bad stories, the outcomes will inevitably be bad, and they will be bad for everyone, right? So the wisdom of the people has to be relied on, and that has to come from a democratic system within organizations as well as at a larger level as well. And this is what we want to bring to our education as well, right? The education. What are the aims of education? Aims of education at some level are very clear. We make humans. हम इंसान बनाते हैं, ठीक? We give them all the skills necessary for being autonomous, independent individuals. What are those skills जिसे आप कभी 21st century skill कहते हैं, कभी कुछ और कहते हैं? By the way, bilingualism is okay. So sometimes you say these are 21st century skills. What is it? Critical thinking, communication, ability to have an argument, understand an argument, and so on and so on. जो market-based skills हैं, that's a separate issue. I mean, those are not as important at the level that we are talking, right? And so what we want to end up is individuals who, when they have spent 4, 5, 10, whatever number of years in our education system, are able to critically think about anyone's story and differentiate between ones that they want to follow or not and ones that are good or not. That ability in the education system is what we want to create, right? So I go back to, say, Immanuel Kant, and there's an essay he wrote on what is enlightenment, and his one-line answer was, enlightenment is the courage to use your own reason. And a lot of his take was essentially humans will not be free unless they have the courage to use their own reason. And वो own reason कैसे आएगा? That's the 21st century skills that we are talking. Your ability to think through critically and objectively and be the autonomous person that we want everyone to be.
So, allowing that space where people can have the courage to think critically, you certainly need good, effective spaces. And to make those spaces, I think it again requires that element and substance of leadership. You've argued about, good leaders making educational institutes versus bad leaders that can just ruin it. How can leadership, and a good one, make a difference at educational institute?
We have plenty of examples of these, but even at a broader level, I think it's not that difficult. So the question is, what is your aim? Do you want to build up an institution, allow people the freedom to do the work that they should be doing? If that's the case, you make the right rules, regulations, structures, etc. You empower people to do the work that they are supposed to do, right? Whether it's a teacher, whether it's an administrator, whether it's whoever, you allow them and you empower them and you essentially let them do the work, get on with the work, right? You give them the tools with which they can do the work. And you also build the confidence in the stories of what you have done so that people are able to see what has been done and then can go ahead from there. Look, universities and educational institutes, especially universities, are very special in that way because they're built over a fairly long time, and the institutional setups that are done in initial years or as you go along provide the scaffolding on which you can keep building the next level of the university and so on. And that's where the leader comes in. The leader's job is not everyday work that is done. That I don't think is the issue here. The leader is that vision and the commitment for that vision and the ability to empower people to get to that vision.
And so, sir, moving forward from here, speaking about our perennial issue about lower net enrollment rates. You cite in one of your write-ups, 20 million children between the ages of 5 and 16 are out of schools, and public education system, if I'm not over-exaggerating, has more or less failed them. Do you think the private sector can work together in some capacity to help the public education system overcome this perennial chronic issue?
So there are 3 or 4 things to think about here. One is that 20 million odd are out of schools, right? They're out of schools mostly because of poverty, mostly because of lack of access. Those are children that private sector will have great difficulty going.
But if I may interject you here, public education system, it's quite free.
I'm coming to
but
that.
Why is it the reason that a lot of these children are unable to attend?
There are 2 sets of people. One is those who have not been ever to school or dropped out. They are not in school systems. Those are 20 million, right? There, mostly the basic problem is poverty or lack of access. And if by private sector you mean for-profit private sector, there is very little that sector can do for those people unless it comes in partnership with the state and the state can subsidize the cost. See? Now you're talking about 2 different sets of children. 60% of our children are still going to public schools. Those children are getting crappy education by and large. And we have seen that. We have the results. We have not just USSA, the annual status for education report. We have even government surveys, etc., World Bank surveys that show the learning poverty in that. 40% of our children are going to, those who are enrolled are going to private schools. The bulk of those private schools are called what are low-fee private schools, right? These are for-profit, low-fee private schools, which you see in every sort of street corner, a Oxford school or a grammar school or whatever. Mm-hmm. By and large, they're also providing very poor quality education. The elite sector is very small. It's about 2-3%, 4% maximum of children enrolled across Pakistan. But though there the fees is very high, as you know, so they'll go into the 20,000, 25,000 and above in that category. But those number of children are very small. Now, private sector provides good education at the elite level. They provide an education that is slightly better than the public sector for bulk of what is called the low-fee private sector. So low-fee private sector and public sector both are failing our children. The difference is the ones who are in private sector, they're say scoring 33%, and the ones in the public sector are scoring 25%. But both are on the lower edge of quality. Now, the question we have is, as a nation, because we did 18th Amendment in 2010. It's been 13 years when we added a right to education clause to our basic rights section of the Constitution, where every child, 5 to 16-year-old, has the state. So the way it's worded is the state shall provide free and compulsory education to every child between the age of 5 and 16. Ek taraf, on one hand, we have that promise in our Constitution. On the other, bulk of our children are either not getting any education or getting an education that is very poor quality. And that's the dilemma that we have. What is the solution, if you are asking about that? The issue is the solution can only be a much higher commitment in terms of resources as well as priority by the public sector. Uske bagair even private sector can't reach these children, right? Private sector goes in places where they have enough of a market and they can recoup the expenses that they make because they are for profit, right?
And how can the government sector or the public sector really help? Like if you could simplify certain interventions that they can do.
So right now we spend 2% of our GDP on education. UN says minimum 4% should be spent on education. Here's an easy one. Let the government give 100% increase to educational expenses, which has been promised by most governments in most sort of political parties in their manifestos for a long time. Everyone says that we'll increase the expenditure in education. None of them do. We are still at 2%. And we have been around 2% for quite some time, right? That needs to go up. Now, people keep saying, well, we don't have enough money, we don't do, our tax to GDP ratio is very low, etc. That is all true, but is education a priority or not? That's the question. It's not about whether we have the money. We have the money. We know that the money goes to many other priorities as well. And so it's an issue of priority, whether it's defense, whether it's X, whether Y, priority issue. You know? So, and many of the countries that went for mass education, so today, yes, we can't compare ourselves to Finland or USA, etc. But when USA and Finland started mass education, which is about 150, 200 years ago, then they were also poor countries, but they prioritized education. So if you think about, let's say, Japan and Meiji Revolution and Restoration, they started in 1860s to put a lot more resources into education. At that time, Japan was a very relatively poor country, and it was afraid that it was going to be conquered by all the colonials, etc. But they started investing in that. South Korea, any country you think of, all these countries invested in education at a time when they were as poor as we are now, or even poorer, and didn't have the resources that they have now. So the issue is of priority. If you're asking simple solutions, here's one. Increase the revenue for, the amount of money that we spent on education. Raise the salaries for teachers. Who becomes a teacher in Pakistan? Is there a single person who, well, there are very few. Let's say some of our surveys show that majority of people say that teaching was not the job of first choice for them, right? And that's true. You'll see a lot more people struggling to get into CSS rather than go into teaching, etc. Why is that? Obviously, the returns are very different. So you want to start changing the returns to teaching as a profession. Now, again, one way is to raise salaries. The other way is to add to recognition of teachers, in terms of what the respect that they might get in society, etc. any other non-monetary incentives that you can provide to teachers, etc. It's not rocket science. Education is being done in 170 odd other countries also. It is being done very well in many countries. Even in our region, we have excellent examples in terms of Sri Lanka and increasingly Bangladesh that have really changed the education sector in a matter of decades. In India, we have the state of Kerala that has done this while being a very leftist state. So it's not as if only rich countries have good education. We have plenty of examples. Issue is, and I say that very clearly, I don't think education has any priority for any government that has come in power for the last 20, 30 years that I've seen.
So speaking of priorities, is it because politicians find it far more easier to show some physical infrastructure development that they've undertaken during their project as a goodie bag to constituencies to say that here's something that I've accomplished, versus showing humans or human population that they've helped in terms of building their skill, in terms of improving their socioeconomic status? Do you think, is it because of those reasons?
So there are at least 3 or 4 or maybe more reasons for this. One is what you've said. Education is a medium to long-term investment. For parents as well as for politicians, the returns are not immediate, and they can't point to something. If you were building a school buildings are easy, right? Here's a school building, here's a road, here's main bijli le aaya hu, I brought water for you, etc. Those are very easy to show, and you can even tell which villages you gave the benefits to. You can even reward your coalition. Giving jobs to people is also easy and simple to see. With education, if you say, look, I've increased the quality of education for your children by X amount. Pehle to X amount is very hard to determine, but also its impact on the life of the people will come over time. So education, for that reason, as you said, becomes a lower priority in the provision of any benefits that politicians go for. The second thing that has happened is what Albert Hirschman's book, Exit, Voice and Loyalty is about, where he shows so in the 80s, we allowed the private sector to come in and thrive. Almost all of the middle and upper classes, and even lower middle class and above, have shifted their children away from public schools to private schools. So who speaks for public schools? The voice for public schools is almost non-existent. Ab ye dekhen ki when the elite schools raised their fee, immediately even the Supreme Court did a suo moto, and they made life hell for many schools and said you can't raise fees by more than 5%. We know 20 million of our children, how many Rizwanas and how many others, 20 million of them are not getting any education. Why doesn't the Supreme Court take suo moto on that? Why don't they put the education minister or the prime minister in jail for that? Because it's a violation. Now we are saying the election is going to be delayed. That's a violation of the Constitution. Our Constitution promises 10 years of education to every child. It hasn't happened for the last 13 years, yet not a single time has any minister or prime minister been put in jail for breaking the Constitution. Education is not a priority. There is no voice for public education in this country. People know they have a choice. If they have money, they'll buy good education for their children. And in a very stratified society. So I can tell you, I do education work I've been doing this for a long time. I have not seen a more fragmented, a more divided and inequitous education system as fragmented, divided, and as it is in Pakistan. पूरी दुनिया में मुझे कहीं नहीं मिला ऐसा. आप कोई एग्जाम्पल मुझे बताएं जहाँ पे इतने बुरा हालात.
Not even among the regional countries.
Regional में तो बिल्कुल नहीं है. India में है काफ़ी division, but still they are doing much better than us. Bangladesh is doing much better. Now, mostly in education and health, हमारा comparison is left with Afghanistan, if you're talking region, or sub-Saharan Africa. This is what Pakistan has come down to. It's very hard to now come and do comparisons even with Bangladesh, who were behind us for quite some time, or Sri Lanka has been ahead of us for a long time. India has pulled away as well. या वो दो छोटे neighbors हैं, Bhutan and Nepal, but they're very small, or it's usually Afghanistan and Sub-Saharan Africa. This is what right now our situation is. If you have money, you can have pretty decent education in Pakistan. But if you don't, the state doesn't deliver, whereas in every country, and this is something, for example, that Miftah and others have talked about, the role of education, private sector in education. Tell me of one single country in this world where the first 10, 12 years of education is not the responsibility of the state. एक मुल्क बता दें ऐसा, या दो बता दें, जिसमें ये ना हो. हर जगह है. हम अनोखे हैं? Have we sort of somehow, are we going to forge a path that no one else has done? And it's not rocket science. All of them are doing it and have done it, as I've
regardless
said.
of the political systems that exist in any country.
Those who are leaning left, those who are US. Is US education private? I mean, is anyone more capitalist than US? Is it private?
And what about China?
China mein to वैसे it's state provided. Na? It's all has always, India, everyone. Look at East Asia. I mean, South Korea, Japan, any country that you think of. Give me an example where school education is not provided for, provided by the state.
Dr. Faisal Bari, on this point, I want you to sort of, step back, put your economist hat on, and think about the issue of reforms. On one hand, we speak of the education crisis. On the other hand, we have the ongoing economic crisis that Pakistan is facing right now. You've, in one of your write-ups, cited example of India, where you suggested that their economic miracle has only happened once when they carried out sector reforms, and that also included the sector of education. If Pakistan wants to go on this path of long-term economic recovery and economic growth, why does it need to prioritize the sector of education?
So tell me, what is your biggest asset? And what is your biggest sort of aim and goal for Pakistan?
Are you asking me or are you asking people?
Anyone.
All right, so if you want to ask about or speak about the general perception, somebody would say, it's the minerals, certain crops, the rivers, etc.
But it's the people. It's the people of Pakistan. People of Pakistan are both the asset that we have and the goal for whom we are working. What is Pakistan without? It's the people, right?
If I were to ask you, in a layman's language, people would say, कि भाई लोगों ने सोना देना या सोने के अंडे देने. So then how do you counter a logic like that?
But look, it is the industriousness, the work, the inventiveness, the ability of people to create new things that's going to change the destiny of this country if it gets changed. If it's going to go under, it is going to be because our people are not educated or trained enough to even benefit from any windfall that might come from a CPEC or from a mineral windfall or anything like that.
And for those sectors to also succeed, you need an educated human resource.
आप कहते हैं you want IT exports to grow like they have in India. Who's going to do the work? Are you going to import the workers? You train them. But training just for one thing is not going to work. You'll need much deeper education. Basic education तो होनी पड़ेगी. Literacy, numeracy, languages, critical thinking, वो तो देनी पड़ेंगी ना. उसके बाद you can give them IT, A, B, C, D, whatever you want. But you have to have that basic education. Which country, as an example, can you think of which has developed without investing in education? I can't think of a single country that has developed without it investing in education, right? In a sustainable way.
If you go about, ask any government in Pakistan that has been in power, they'll say, see, we've created so many universities, hundreds of thousands of children or young youth have, graduated out of these schools. We've provided so many higher education degrees to, these many number of kids. But the question is, do we really need to produce or mass produce, students or graduates who actually possess these degrees, or do we really need something else?
तो इसमें दो चीज़ें सोचने वाली हैं. देखिए, एक तो ये है कि a lot of people argue in similar vein and go even further and say, what's the point of producing all these graduates when our unemployment rate for graduates is very high, right? There are two things to understand here. One is basic education is a right that every individual should have, and that has nothing to do with their ability to do anything. It has to do with having a decent life. किसी ज़माने में when Adam Smith was writing, he said, if a person doesn't have a linen shirt, a clean linen shirt, then they can't go out in public. So clean linen shirt should be a basic right. Now, right to life in some ways now requires certain level of literacy, numeracy, etc. Are you going to use your ATM or not? Are you going to even use your mobile phone or not? Now, all those require basic literacy. And the economy, the way it's changing fast, you need people to have that irrespective of whether they do much after that or not, right? So that's a given, which goes to the 20 million that are out of school, and also goes to anybody who's getting poor quality education at the beginning. Now, when I come to university, yes, university education is not a right. University education need not happen for every child who does his FSC or A-levels.
Then what else is the solution?
Let me come to it. But for numbers that we do want to have, right? So right now we are, I think, at 8 or 7 or 8% of our of children who come into schooling go on to university. In India, that number is around, I think, 15 odd percent. In our Vision 2025, HEC was saying we want to raise it to about 15, but वो अभी तो 8-9% पे है. In US, that would probably be around 40, 45 or 50%. England is slightly less, but that's the range in which the number of children who go through education then go on to university education. So there are two things that need to happen. One is, for those who are not going to university education, there should be very good viable alternatives for vocational education, right? So there will always be children who don't want to, or for another reason can't go beyond high school, but you have to have very good skill program so that they can have an access to a good career and a decent life, whether that's in any kind of, and there are plenty of options there. For those who do go to university, the quality of education is what matters. You see, here's the paradox that I have. You're talking about 20, 30 new universities, 40 new universities being approved in the last few days by Parliament and Senate. I have been in a university for 25 years. I tell you very openly, even for a school like LUMS, one of the biggest problems we have is getting new faculty. We can't find any. At the same time, you will see HEC has a website on which they say 400, 500 people are registered who have done PhDs, but kind of can't find a job as faculty.
And why is that?
That's the problem, right? The mismatch in quality. So many of those PhDs are either in areas or are of quality that many existing universities can't employ them. Existing universities are starving because they need people. But the quality of graduates that are coming from most of our universities is not of the quality that either our employers can hire or can become faculty as well. So that mismatch in quality has to be removed. And sadly, I mean, this is something that I've said even though I was a member for HEC for 3 years, we have not been, HEC as a regulator, etc., has not been able to do much about the quality of education at the university level. Quantity has increased significantly and continues to. I think what happened to through private education in the 80s at the school level is now happening at the university level. Huge number of universities now opening and coming up. But we have not been able to regulate them enough to ensure at least a minimum standard of education to be given to our undergraduates.
I'll come to the question of the quality of education, but before that, you spoke about vocational education. So where do you see the role of private sector? Because I'm sure you, as someone focusing and researching on issues of education, will very well agree and understand that government itself cannot pull off a feat as big as this by providing large scale, imparting of skills or vocational training. So can the private sector in this situation factor in to sort of, help the government?
Yes, of course.
Provide those skills?
Of course. I mean, so there are some social factors here also. A lot of people, there is, so I'll just point out 2 or 3. I don't know how to remove them because these are social factors that are long-term and require social rethinking in some ways of norms. A lot of people think very poorly of people who work with their hands, right? So it's very common, for example, when I go to villages and I ask people कि भाई बच्चा क्या कर रहा है, मैट्रिक कर लिया, so then what is he doing? कुछ भी नहीं, नौकरी का इंतज़ार कर रहे हैं. So then why doesn't he work in the fields, etc. और ये पढ़ लिख गया तो काम नहीं करता, right? As in somebody who whoever gets educated takes it to mean that they're not going to work with their hands, they're not going to do hard physical labor, etc., etc. And that association goes back to our, I guess, a lot of social cultural history. That has to be somehow broken, right? The worth of a human is not tied to, or should not be, to a job that they have, right? So in many countries, if there's a plumber visiting you or electrician, you're not going to serve them in different burthen, in different utensils. You're not going to make them sit on the floor. Their worth as a human is not tied to what they're
Instead,
doing.
they're making more money than most.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, but that money is just one aspect. I mean, there might be plumbers and electricians making good returns even in Pakistan, but our caste system, and this is in some ways caste, our caste system is very strong where they are always, their worth as human is somehow less. We have to somehow break that.
So you're suggesting that we actually require a change of attitude.
Very much so, because without that, no parent would want you to become a plumber. No parent would want you to become an electrician, etc., even though the returns might be very good in some places, or a chef, or a X, or a Y, because eventually we have derogatory terms for almost all of those work, and we think that there is somehow less human, less worthy of our attention, etc.
We have...
Sorry, I'm just going to finish. So without doing that, even if you open more, and more opportunities are needed, our vocational education is very small and it is very, very restricted right now. A lot more needs to be done in terms of institutions, private sector, public sector, partnerships, and so on, to improve opportunities.
So for example, if there's any private institute that, or any entrepreneur, education entrepreneur that is interested in sort of, giving those skills out to a large set of, suitable and aspiring candidates, what kind of skills, and I don't want to catch you off guard, but what kind of skills do you think can be imparted to students? Like that have probably a higher demand in a market like Pakistan?
So, as I said, the structure of many of these is very wonky right now. Think about, so Pakistan is one of the few countries where we have more doctors than nurses, which is very strange, right? You don't need doctors for a lot of things, and in other countries you'll find paramedics and nurses doing a lot of the work. And nursing, by the way, is not just for women. It's not gender differentiated that way, right? But here it is. Here do people think of nursing as a career? In other countries they do. The returns are very different. The respect is very different. So we have to, a lot of those things have to change, because the numbers that we need in health sector, in education, even today, Punjab is probably the most resourced in education. We still, 18-20% of our primary schools are still doing multigrade teaching. We have 440,000 teachers, roughly, or 450,000 teachers employed by just government in Punjab. We still need another probably 150, 200,000 to fill all the spaces for education, teachers only. And then you think about health sector and nursing and so on and so forth. Service sector is where most jobs of the future are. It's not in manufacturing. And so those are the vocations, those are the skills that we need to impart and make those careers worth pursuing. Otherwise, seeing the large numbers that we have, and we haven't done our demographic transition, how are we going to employ these people? And if we can't employ them, how are they going to contribute to the national effort?
And speaking about the quality of education now, you did point to, an anomaly that was being faced by LUMS when they required new faculty members, and I'm sure other universities are also facing similar problems. Let me ask you then, let's pick programs like liberal arts education or even STEM programs within the universities. We often see, our students or perhaps graduates struggling with basic skills such as, being able to write something or articulate their thought process. And then at the same time, when it comes to producing quality analysis, they would fail at using or perhaps, undertaking or utilizing quantitative skills or tools. How do you think universities can sort of improve that deficit that they have at their end?
We'll have to start much earlier. I think schooling has to change also. What's the dominant mode of schooling which comes to us in the form of children who do A-levels or FSC, etc. They come to us when. I think it's at the foundation level that we're making big mistakes. And those mistakes have to do with the fact that textbook has too much value. Our assessments are coming from textbooks. Our curriculum is textbook driven. So we make a curriculum and then we make a textbook saying, here's the textbook. That's curriculum based, only work with this, right? And so a lot of students that I faced for the last 25, 30 years in university, they don't have the ability to do independent thinking. It's not the same as Ratta.
So we've kind of like straitjacketed their thinking?
Rote learning is one, right? Many come through rote learning, that's fine. Rote we need for some things as well. I'm sure you must have done your tables when you were young. So rote has value, but education is not just rote learning, right? But it's not just about rote. It's about reproduction. So what we are training them in is, okay, here, read this, understand it if you can, and what is needed is your ability to reproduce it in more or less the same form. That doesn't develop their thinking ability and personality, right? What they have to do is to critically analyze it. It is to question, is to break it apart, is to play with it, is to be able to internalize it. Then we say that, yes, you have understood something, right? And this is what, that Maslow's
pyramid of hierarchies.
Hierarchy of learning and so on and so forth, right? So we have to go to the higher level of learning, higher levels, to ensure that our students are able to do that. I'll give you a very simple example. So I did my A-levels from Pakistan long ago, when probably all of you weren't even born. So, and then I went to Oxford to study. And one of the first essays I wrote for my tutor, I read it out, it was one-on-one tutorial, I read it out, and as soon as I finished, he sort of picked up that piece of paper that I had written my essay on, and he said, Faisal, this is not an essay. I'd done very well academically throughout my career, in A-levels also, in the BA that I did here as well. So it came as a shock to me, why is he saying that?
But why did he say that?
And so I asked him exactly that. And he said, look, I know so the question I had given you, it was, I think, on John Stuart Mill and on liberty or something. He said, you very well conveyed what John Stuart Mill said, what his critics have said. I still don't know what Faisal Bari said. Okay. So it made me realize that I am too much of a prisoner to what I'm reading still, and I'm not fully internalizing to make it my own and to create my own thinking about it. Remember what Kant said, the courage to use your own reason. And that, I think, is the main failing that we have for most children that I see coming to university, etc. And to break that mold at university level, we only have 4 years for undergrad, right? Is very hard because they have this many courses, they are growing up, they have other things to do. It's much easier to do that at the school level where we have 12 years than be able to do that at university when they are fixed in their ways to a certain extent. They've been rewarded for their ratta and reproduction. And now to convince them to change is harder. It's much more difficult. It's much more of an effort for them and for us. If we could go back and change at the school level, then it would be much easier. And it's not a difficult change. I think most people would be able to manage. But the problem is that our deeper state imperatives are not aligned with making people more independent and making them critical thinkers, etc. So we normally say that maths, physics, they can do their critical thinking, but not in Islamiyat and Pakistan studies and this and that, etc. That's not how critical thinking works. It either works for all subjects because it becomes a personality trait and a way of your being. So either it works in all areas or it doesn't work. So if you encourage it in just maths and not in other areas, then it's not going to happen. So what do? They do theorems like all of us used to do. We take the theorem, we take the proof, we just verbalize it, wrote it, and we do the Q&D in the exam, and that's about it. It never gets within us and internalized.
So what you're suggesting is that what really happens at the university level has to actually start back at the school
Very
level.
much so.
And so before we wrap up our conversation, my last question is about the future of learning and education itself. You're a researcher, an academic, and an economist. So let me ask you, we definitely see the role of AI getting embedded in nearly every area. We have a team out here that also relies on AI applications to edit, the videos, the podcasts that we make. What about the area of learning itself? How would you suggest, or how do you foresee the aspect of learning and education itself getting impacted by AI itself? And how can, academics actually allow its use in a responsible and an ethical manner?
So I think the initial reaction of AI, both from students and faculty, has not been very constructive, in my opinion. I mean, students have used them to do their assignments and essays and so on. And faculty think, they do a check on plagiarism check on student essays and say, oh, if it's coming through AI, it's a really bad idea. The way for the moment I've been thinking about AI is that it's a very, very good tool that can help a student's understanding. Look, if you're struggling with a concept, if you're trying hard to understand something, whether it be physics or economics or education, whatever, if AI can help you understand it, that's lovely. It's very much like asking a friend for help. It's also very much like doing a very smart Google, right? AI is much more sophisticated. It has learning, but if you have a very smart friend, you can always ask them a question and they might be able to better explain to you how something works. So as long as students and people use AI as a way of enhancing their understanding, as a way of getting deeper into whatever subject they want to go into, I think it's a lovely tool to be able to bring to classes, etc. But if it is only used for, I have a question, essay question that says this or that, and I'll just generate it through AI and submit it, then you're shortchanging your own education as well. You're shortchanging your learning. You'll never learn what the concept was about, what was the question about. And that is that's like any other plagiarism and a bad use of AI. So I think AI has tremendous potential to help and eventually to even individualize learning and to go into edtech as well, right? Because edtech right now has tremendous potential, but so far we have not been able to break into it in a big way. So the solution for the 20 million that are out of school, solution for ensuring quality, a lot of these might be possible to crack through EdTech, and AI would be an important part of that. You want to teach our children English language and so on, we can have AI-assisted programs eventually. So the potential is massive. How we use it is what will determine whether that potential is achieved or whether it will just be a tool for plagiarism and so on.
The example that you actually cited of, a friend that you reach out to and ask for advice, we know often some of the smartest and the best of the best friends can end up giving us a bad answer or a bad response. A similar issue also takes place with AI as well, where they hallucinate or they're not giving us the right information. So what kind of vigilance as AI applications go on and tend to, get better and better during that interval, what kind of vigilance would you actually advise students and academics to practice to be able to, sort of...
Yeah, I think the same thing we do with about asking a friend and so on. If you're very free, cooperative learning is a cooperative process, right? It's not individualized in the sense that people can help each other a lot. Peer learning is very important, as important in class and in school as it is in university or in life even, right? We learn a lot from each other. Now, that has to be encouraged. But the ultimate responsibility of how you use that learning is individualized. And that responsibility you can't do away with. वो किसी ज़माने में we used to have that saying, नकल के लिए भी अकल चाहिए. तो वो अकल से you can't step away from. That will always be needed. Otherwise, you will be not even be using a tool like AI well.
Dr. Faisal Bari, thank you so much for inviting us over at Ideas, and thank you for this conversation. Thank you so much for staying with us through this conversation with Dr. Faisal Bari. Our team works very hard to make this work possible, and it would mean the world to us if you could like and share our content to show your support. And if you'd like to stay informed on upcoming podcasts and other work, please hit the bell icon.